All right, I think we have mostly everybody here. In case you had just joined, quick introduction again. My name is Nick Paolini, systems engineer over at Veeam, and we will be talking about recovering from an outage or attack before, during, and after today. Quick administrative points. This is being recorded, so you will get a link to replay this at the end. Everyone is on mute, but please use the Q&A section in GoToWebinar to ask any questions that you may have. And let's get started here. So, quick agenda for today's webinar. We're going to do a quick overview of just the Veeam data platform. Talk about, everything Veeam does have to offer, since we are a lot more than just virtualization. Most of what is going to be covered today is going to be a demo. Not really a whole lot of slides for you today, but I'm gonna, chat and go over immutability configuration, talk about some different repositories and, how those can be set up and structured. Then we're going to go into malware detection, show you what it looks like when Veeam does detect malware, what you can see, what you can do. And then finally, how you can recover when you do find malware inside your environment. So a lot of this is really going to be talking about security capabilities. Obviously, malware and security are definitely big topics these days, just because they have been so, prevalent everywhere, really. So quick overview of the Veeam data platform here. In, I believe it was 2008, like I said, we just started with really just virtualization backups. But now, we offer recovery orchestration in Veeam Orchestrator, monitoring and analytics in Veeam and Veeam ONE, backup and fast recovery, obviously. We cover, a multitude of hypervisors, physical machines with agents, different SaaS platforms like Microsoft 365, Salesforce. And we now have, our own backup as a service options in Veeam Data Cloud, which is fully hosted by Veeam. So definitely a lot more going on than when we initially started. So let's jump right into the demos here. Bear with me one moment here while I change up my screens. All right, so the first thing I really want to chat about is, immutable storage. That's really going to be one of your best lines of defense against ransomware. Reason being, you have all your backups in an immutable repository. That data, it cannot be changed, it cannot be altered. It's safe, essentially. You always want at least one or more copies of your backup data on immutable storage as almost a fail-safe in case something does happen to your environment, something else is compromised. Those immutable backups, they're always going to be there and they're always going to be available for you. So a few different options that you have with Veeam here. What I want to talk about first is just a Veeam Linux hardened repository. This is, a Linux server with any attached storage. And what it does is uses a flag on all the data, and call it worm, write once, read many. So the data can be written once and changed once. Or I'm sorry, not changed once, just written once, and then there's your data. And then you can read it as many times as you like. So it's always there, available to be restored from. And with this Linux hardened repository, I want to get this up on the screen. There is even a script for setting that up. Right here, it's just on, Veeam Hub. This is an open source Linux script. Quick and easy. You can download it, view it. It's, completely open source and open to the public, so you can see everything it's going to do. But it will go in and harden that Linux server for you, which, enables those immutability flags. It locks down the server in a few other ways as well. And it's really as simple as just running a script on that Linux box. And once that's set up, you can just add your Linux server as a hardened repository in Veeam here. And we have this nice little button here to specify it is a hardened repository for all those immutable backups. And, like adding any other Veeam repository, it's as simple as, giving it a name, description, specifying the server itself, some credentials, and then, you are all set. So what else can you do? Or I guess, what are your other options for immutable storage? I want to talk about scale out backup repositories, because this is a great way to kind of mix and match different storage and kind of automate any, copy policies, move policies, and really have, full control over that data in immutable repositories. So you can see I have two right here. Let me go into this Azure scale out backup repository, but essentially how these work is it combines multiple repositories into one Veeam repository. So your first tier is what we call the performance tier. This is usually going to be, local storage. If that's available, you can use, cloud storage as well. But it's going to be, it's going to be the first stop for your data. So when you run those backup jobs, this is the first place that data is going to go. And you can see, there are some rules with mixing and matching, storage options, as I can include a couple repositories in the performance tier, and Veeam will take care of, storing the data on each of those repositories. There are some advanced settings, with how you want that data to be distributed in those repositories. So you do still have full control. But what I really want to talk about here is this capacity tier. So with the scale out backup repository, you can have all your data, sent to that first performance tier, and then you specify your capacity tier. And this is where, you can put in some immutable Azure storage if you like. And with these policies in here, or with these options, I should say, you can set it to where everything that is written to that first tier, let's say it's a Linux hardened repository, you can immediately copy that data to the capacity tier. So with that one backup job, you can meet your 3-2-1 rule, where you still have your production data, and you also have your data in two different repositories on two different formats. You can also structure it to move data out of that first repository, the performance tier, as it ages out. So usually that's done because your performance tier, it's just going to be more expensive storage, since it is, readily accessible, faster storage. You can set this to where maybe after 7 days, all those backups on your performance tier are moved to the capacity tier. And you can set it up to just move and not copy. So maybe you're only keeping, anything after that in your Azure storage, your Azure immutable storage. We always recommend best practice, more copies and more immutable places, the safer you are. But you can really structure this, however you like. And you can also encrypt everything as well. It's always good to encrypt your data, because you want to encrypt it before somebody else does, essentially. There is a third tier option for this as well, where you can send GFS backups to AWS Glacier or Azure Archive storage. So you can even have, a longer retention period where you're just keeping those monthly or yearly backups in, Glacier storage or Azure Archive, where they're just going to sit and you hope to ever need them, but they are still there. And this is all taken care of by just this one scale out backup repository. And all those settings, it's just made in here. And just one simple place to really manage everything. And, while we're talking about immutable storage, you can see I have a couple different immutable storage options in here. Obviously, AWS, Wasabi, Azure are, fairly popular object storage options. We also integrate very well with Object First. If you wanted to take the on-premise object storage route, then you have on-premise immutable object storage, at your fingertips. And a newer solution that we offer is called Veeam Data Vault. This is object storage, fully managed by Veeam. It does live in Azure, but it is essentially one, flat fee depending on size, and Veeam will manage, the security and everything revolving around it. So, if you're new to cloud storage or setting up immutable storage, it is a really quick and easy way to get that offsite immutable object storage without having to go through any configuration or any setup or, worrying about any varying costs with cloud storage, such as, your ingress, egress fees, etc. And that is also just the same as everything else to set up. We have a new button when you are adding an object storage. You just click on Veeam Data Cloud Vault, add in the info for your Veeam Vault storage, and it'll be available as a repository there. So talking about immutability, obviously that's, what's going to drive most of this conversation here. But you obviously want to be as prepared as you can, just to deter any ransomware attacks that could happen here. So one thing I do want to touch on briefly, since I do get asked a lot of, what are Veeam's best practices? How do I, lock down our Veeam server? What should we do with this? Because everyone wants to stay protected, obviously. This security and compliance analyzer up top here, this is going to list off all of Veeam's best practices for, what you should do with your backup infrastructure, what you should do with, the Veeam software itself, and how that should be set up. And you can click on this. You can see it analyzing right now, but it's going to go through and scan all of these essentially and let me know if I passed or failed. I know sometimes this list can be a little intimidating because it does literally list out every single Veeam best practice in here. And you can see in my little sandbox demo lab, I have a lot of red X's and yellow triangles, which is obviously not the best. But what we do offer as well, there is a script that you can run on your Veeam server. It is this KB right up top here, Veeam KB 4525. You can download the script, run it on your server, and it will implement every single best practice and every single setting that you see on this list right here. It is something to be a little weary of, just depending on what else your Veeam server may be doing or what it needs to work in your infrastructure or environment. Because some of these settings, that we recommend, yes, it's a best practice for Veeam, but it may not play nice with something else that you have going on, in your environment. So, yes, it definitely can be used. But just beware, go through, make sure you understand everything that it is going to change and implement before you run that, just to alleviate any issues with other programs or connectivity that may pop up there. And just as a quick mention, I want to bring this up right here with the Veeam configuration backup. So, another question I get asked all the time is, what happens if something happens to my Veeam server or the Veeam server is down? I always recommend taking a configuration backup and sending it to an offsite immutable storage, which is usually going to be, some cloud object storage. That way, if something ever does happen to your Veeam server, you have that full configuration and you can import and restore and spin up that Veeam server anywhere else. It's going to, keep all your jobs, all your repositories. It's basically going to look like nothing ever happened and it won't skip a beat. So this is something, you can schedule, do ad hoc backups, obviously encrypt the backup as well. So definitely very important because, obviously you want to keep your backup safe, but you want to keep your backup infrastructure safe as well and make sure that's easy to recover if you ever need to. And one more thing I wanted to kind of touch on briefly. I'm just popping up Veeam ONE, our monitoring and analytics tool. You can see, I have insight into my whole Veeam backup infrastructure over here, but you can go through and look at your different repositories just for a nice broad overview to say, hey, look, here's my Azure storage. I have 30 days of immutability on there. If I wanted to check up on my, AWS repository, gives you a really nice, just kind of at a glance view of, any used space, how much space you have left, and, everything on what's going on inside that repository. So another nice tool just to really help you keep an eye on things. I see some questions coming through here. Is cloud listed as a type under repository? So if I understand the question, I'm just looking at all of my backup repositories right here. You can see the type, or I guess the different types that there are, depending on that storage, what it is. Obviously, if it's Amazon S3, it's going to pick that up. If it's something more generic, it may say cloud. Or if you're talking about, adding repositories, I guess when I say cloud, we're usually thinking object storage. These are going to be all your options that you can add into Veeam as a cloud repository. So a lot of the big names, they're pre-populated on here, like Azure, S3, Wasabi, and then Veeam Data Cloud Vault. But we also have this S3 compatible. So any object storage that is on-premise or cloud that is S3 compatible, Veeam will be able to use that as a repository. So essentially, if you don't see your storage on this list right here, you would just click S3 compatible and then continue through the wizard and get your storage added there. And I need to see one more for the script. The KB number for that security and compliance analyzer is 4525. And that will give you that script. A lot of good information on there. I know I'm kind of scrolling through it quickly here just for the sake of time, but give you an idea of what it looks like, if things passed, if they're not implemented, what your options are, for running it. A big one on here is it will disable RDP on that server. So depending on how you normally access your Veeam server, that's definitely something to take in consideration before you go ahead and run that script. I know we do have quite a bit of questions coming in. It is just me today, so I'll do my best to get to some as we go through, but we may just have to kind of circle back towards the end and address some more questions there. So now that we've talked about immutable storage, how to keep your Veeam server safe, how to keep your environment protected, what does it look like when Veeam does detect some malware, or you do notice some malware on your system here? So if I go back into my inventory here, you'll see on the top left, it just says malware detection with this little bug. You can see that Veeam has found, some infected machines, some suspicious machines, stuff that it's, reporting on, basically saying, some things it knows this is known malware, this machine is infected. Suspicious usually means, it's an onion link or something similar where it's definitely worth another look. But let's talk about, how those are found. So there's a few things that Veeam will do for you here. In the malware detection settings, we have an inline entropy analysis. So this is going to basically run scans, on a job level basis. And it's going to scan for any, large groups of data that are now encrypted that were previously not encrypted. This does this by essentially taking a baseline reading for the first backup or for the first backup when this is turned on. And you can change the sensitivity, depending on the machine. Sometimes a machine, it will have a lot of data encrypted in between each backup, and that's just normal operating procedure. So you may want to change the, sensitivity down a little bit to low, or, up, bump it up towards extreme if, you're really never seeing any encrypted data there. The other section of this is enabling file system activity analysis down here. So there is an XML that lives in the Veeam configuration files, and it has a giant library of basically malware file types, suspicious file types, and I'll get into that in a second here. But every backup, when this is enabled, it is going to, run through all those file types and, compare with that master list in the XML and flag anything that does pop up as suspicious or known malware. And you'll see I have this little checkbox down here, update malware definitions automatically. Reason being is one of those things on that best practices list is, to mainly keep your Veeam server offline, essentially, with no internet access. So obviously this is something that, you do want to keep up to date. So I'm going to point you to another KB here. It is KB 4514. And this is basically going to detail how to update that XML file. It's quick and easy. It gives you a download link to the most recent one, and then it shows you exactly where to put that file. And then you restart the Veeam Data Analyzer service, and that's all she wrote, essentially. And just to give you an idea of what this file looks like, you can see, I'll scroll down a little bit, but chances are if you open this up and look for, any malware file extensions that you may be familiar with, it's going to be in this list. There's, at this point, over 4,000 file types in here at least, and it is constantly updated, when new things are seen out in the wild. And, if you do have your Veeam server online and that box checked, it's going to update this file automatically for you, so you never really have to worry about it. But you can see if anything, any of these files are present on your backups, they're going to get flagged. One thing to note is you should never edit this file because that will cause some issues, because obviously if a bad actor gets in, one of the first things they might do is try to edit that file, so maybe Veeam doesn't find their malware. So it is signed. If it is edited, it will cause issues and throw some warnings at you. But another really cool security feature, that was added recently, and that's going to scan, any job that has file indexing turned on. It's going to run that file system analysis on all those jobs while the jobs are being run. So it's not something that you have to go out of your way to schedule, set differently, and it all happens, locally. It doesn't send anything out to the internet, to Veeam, to the cloud, anywhere. It just all happens locally within your environment there. So getting back to the malware detection, actually, before I chat about that, I just want to chat about the other two tabs in here, which are pretty neat. Notifications, obviously, you can have notifications set up. If anything is detected, you can have an email sent out to the right person when it happens, just so everybody is aware. And this is also a newer feature with Veeam's Incident API. It will essentially, communicate with an external threat detection engine. And, if that engine notifies Veeam of an infection, it can trigger a backup, before that threat has a chance to really do any damage or cause some problems there. There is quite a bit of documentation, and we can chat about that all day, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. But just know that it is there and it is available, and it is I think a pretty cool feature, really. So now that we've enabled our malware scans, enabled our file indexing scans, all that fun stuff, you can see I have some machines that Veeam found malware on. So let's kind of talk about, what do you do when that happens, really? First thing that I would like to do is, go into malware detection, say, hey, these are my, suspicious machines. I'm going to go in and just click on show history. And this is going to show all of my backups here. And you can see that little red bug on every single one of these backups. And, obviously we weren't keeping an eye on it. It's been infected since December 5th last year, which is, quite some time here. But, this is obviously a demo environment, so harmless malware on here. But you can go in here and even look back to see when your last clean restore point is. So, let's say everything was caught as soon as it happened. I found malware on 8/26 on my backup yesterday. Everything else before that would be missing that little red bug. And I could say, oh, I still do have a clean backup. And what restore point to target when you do need to, restore that machine. And I want to show you one more thing here. I'm going to go into a different machine, but if we're looking in our backups, obviously you'll see that little red bug pop up on anything that Veeam reports as infected or having malware. So if I want to go in here, I can also go in and scan my backup. So let's say that I didn't have this malware detection enabled and it was found on my most recent backup, and I want to be sure that I'm restoring from a clean backup. I can run this scan first, and it's going to give me a couple options. First one is just finding the last clean restore point. So what that is going to do is start with your most recent backup, run a scan. If it finds anything suspicious or malware, it's just going to move right on to the next backup and continue that process until it does find a clean backup. You can also set a range of, when you want to scan. So if you're targeting specific dates, if you have a, suspicion that, a breach happened on a certain date, you can start before that. You could just scan everything. So you do have some pretty good options with those scans. And these last two checkboxes down here, I know they look like just kind of simple checkboxes, nothing to really note, but they are some pretty powerful tools. The first one is going to let you scan your restore points with an antivirus engine. So that's going to use, whatever engine that you currently have in your infrastructure to scan those Veeam backups. And just to give you a little bit more info on that, I wanted to pull this up here. Out of the box, it is going to automatically work with, Symantec, Windows Defender, Trellix, which is formerly McAfee, some of the bigger names out there. And that requires, no configuration, no setup. All you really have to do is check that box and let it do its thing. If you have a different software, which obviously there are a lot out there, and people use a wide range of antivirus and anti-malware and endpoint protections. Essentially, if your solution can be interfaced with a command line, you can set Veeam up to work with it. So this is all done by the antivirus info's XML file that is contained in the Veeam's configuration files. And this is just a link to the help center in Veeam, but it will show you that file and it will go in and kind of detail how that file is set up and what you would need to punch in to essentially link your solution with Veeam so you can start scanning your backups with that solution that you already have in your environment. And I know this list here with looks like 5 of the big names now, it is constantly getting bigger. We're natively integrating with more things every day. It feels like. So sometimes tough to keep up with from my perspective, but nobody ever complains about more integration and just more native support, for all the tools that are out there. So that is essentially what this little checkbox does here. And the second box here, you can scan those restore points with Yara rules as well. So I know Yara rules, most of the time I mention that, people usually look at me with a blank stare. They don't really know what they are. But you can see I have a couple in here. What these rules are, they're completely customizable. Things I want to say you would create yourself, but there's a bunch of sources to get those Yara rules that I'll get into shortly here. But you can tailor those rules to search for very specific things. So let's say you're looking for a very specific malware that has made it into your infrastructure. You can tailor a Yara rule to specifically search for that. So all mine here, they're pretty generic, mostly test rules. But what I want to show you up top here is this is a very easy URL, vee.am/Yara. If you punch that in, it will take you to the Veeam community Yara and script library. So there are a lot of people from Veeam who post very useful stuff in here, some community members as well. But what I want to point out, you can go up top, just search for featured Yara rule, and top 10 ransomware threats will pop up. And this will give you a download of the top 10 malware threats and a YAR rule for each one of them. And you can just import those right onto your Veeam server. There's a file that you just save them to in the Veeam file structure. And then once they're there, they'll just pop up in this little drop-down menu for you. So I know, creating your own YAR rules, it can sound a little overwhelming if you don't really know much about them, but there are a lot of great community resources out there. I've even used, Microsoft Copilot to write some for me, and, grabbed a lot from just, community boards and from other people at Veeam. So there's plenty of resources out there, so you don't really have to write your own rules. And they're all there just ready to go for you. So let me get back into Veeam here. So this is how you scan your backup, essentially. So, there is malware. I want to find the latest clean restore point. That's generally the option that I'm going to take. Scan it with my AV, maybe run a YAR rule if there's something that I suspect is on there, and then hit OK. And what that's going to do is, you can see I have 17 restore points here. It's going to, start at number 1, the most recent, and go back through all of my available restore points until it does find a clean backup. Obviously, the goal is, to catch anything before it's been sitting there for too long, so that you actually do have, a clean restore point. That's why it is important, to have that immutable storage, so you do have those older backups that can't be infected, and that, you do have your Veeam server locked down, and you do have all these detection settings, enabled and running. So when something does happen, you can catch it right away, you can recover quickly, and, really avoid the bulk of any damage there. And one last thing I want to mention about that. Some of you may have noticed where, the status on these, this says infected, this says suspicious, and these two say infected. It will tell you, what it found. Obviously, this one, known malware extension, onion link. This one was, just an onion link up there. If you have something that's suspicious and you run it with your, AV scan, and then it really finds something, it'll change that tag to infected. The suspicious is kind of like a pre-warning to say, hey, we found something suspicious, like it says, and it's really worth another scan. And you can do that, just by simply scanning your backup here. So I've covered a lot of, what it looks like when you find malware. There is one more thing I want to show you here. Let me pull up my agent jobs. So this is the job, that has these infected machines. You can also, if there is a false positive, you can mark those as clean, and it'll get rid of that bug, which, depending on what's going on with those jobs, it could be a false positive, and you don't really know until you kind of fully investigate it, essentially. And the last thing I want to show you, I'm just looking at the history on one of these, basically all my infected machines here. Once you're in here, you can right click and go to details, and that's where it's actually going to show you what it found here. So it tells me, these are the file types that it did find. This is just kind of what we have planted on those servers, just so they pop up here. And then what it does is it gives you this file path here, and this is just a log file, and it can be found on your Veeam server, and it gives you that file path right there. And just to show you what that looks like, once I open up that file, gives you, the information on basically everything with that machine and job. And then at the bottom here, this is what I want to focus on. It's showing you exactly where those files are. So these are just all, you could see the names, test, bad extension, just sitting on the administrator's desktop. But, if they were hidden away in some, folder or wherever they are and Veeam finds them, it's going to show you exactly where they are. So, you could do your own investigation if you need to as well. So it won't just tell you, hey, it is infected. It'll show you what it found and where it is. And really all you need to know about that file there. And in case you are getting false positives, kind of like I mentioned before, you also have the option to exclude extensions from that monitoring. If there's a specific file type that keeps getting flagged, but it is a file type you use, you could just exclude it, so it won't be marked as suspicious anymore, and you'll stop getting those false positives. So after we've scanned our backups, we've taken a look at everything here, found the malware. Now it is time to restore. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Obviously with Veeam, I'm sure some of you are aware, we have many different restore options, instant recovery to multiple different hypervisors, send it to, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Proxmox coming soon. If it hasn't already, I might have to double check myself on that. But you obviously have a lot of restore options. Let's say, this is our infected machine. We want to restore this machine. When I go into my restore points, I notice that they're all infected. And obviously we don't want to restore from an infected machine. But let's say, my most recent one is clean, but I want to really be sure that it is clean. We're just going to go through, a normal restore to original location. But you'll see this option right underneath called Secure Restore. And we'll give this a minute here just to load up, but this is kind of what I wanted to talk about. So these are going to give you those same options that we just talked about while you restore. So if you want to really make sure you're not restoring any malware into your environment, you can just check this where it will abort the restore if it does find anything suspicious. If you need that restore to go through just for some testing or something else, you can just have those network adapters disabled during that restore so it can't spread throughout your network and it'll just be, that one machine. And we can check this box as well, so it will continue to scan everything just to make sure it really finds everything that could still be suspicious or malicious on that specific backup. So you do have a lot of ways to really, find that malware, restore a clean backup, and, perform all that fairly quickly. And, these settings are really all just easy wizard-driven checkboxes and little toggles right here. So no advanced configuration, it's all just included with Veeam, nothing extra, built right in. So definitely a lot of cool jobs here. And a lot of options for, avoiding malware, really, to say the least. I do want to save some time at the end just for questions. I know we are coming up on time here. Let me take a look here. I know we have quite a bit, and I haven't been monitoring them too much here. So I do see one here. Is Veeam ONE part of the backup and replication software, or is that a separate product? So that is a separate product. It is not directly part of Veeam Backup and Replication. Everything else I've shown you is included with Veeam Backup and Replication. Anytime I opened up this window with the little blue banner up top, that is going to be a separate product. It's our monitoring and reporting analytical tool. It'll give you a lot of insight into your virtual infrastructure and Veeam infrastructure. Let me take a look, see if there's anything here. Does the exclusion only apply to that individual object, or is excluded across all at that point? So that will be, they're all global settings. If we're talking about the malware exclusions, there is one more part I want to show you here. In your malware settings up top, you'll see exclusions as well. This is going to be different than those, file type exclusions. This is where you can add specific, machines to be excluded from those scans. If there's a specific reason you want to do that, usually what I see is, a lot of people won't have all of this turned on out of the box. And if you have a large environment with a lot of backup jobs running, this will definitely put a higher load on your CPU if it tries to do that first baseline scan on all those jobs at once. So a good way to avoid that is, let's say you're running Veeam now, everything's running great. You want to enable this malware scanning, but you don't want it to really slow down your environment or cause too many problems. What you can do is add literally every machine, to your exclusions list, and then slowly remove them in groups or one by one or however you want. So that way it's kind of a slow rollout of those scans. So you don't have to just roll it out on every single machine at once and maybe, have too much of a CPU load where it does slow things down and they might run outside of your backup window or something like that. I'm just going through the questions here, making sure I didn't miss anything that I haven't covered already here. Does Veeam have an alert function when locked config backup storage is reaching a storage threshold? So a lot of that will be, I guess if we're talking about configuration backup with what I mentioned earlier, where you can back up the configuration of your Veeam server, depending, where you're sending that is definitely something you can use, Veeam ONE to really get a great insight on. You can set alarms on your repositories to, send alerts or generate events, when they reach a certain threshold. And there's a lot of really powerful, reporting and monitoring tools inside Veeam ONE. Go through the rest of the questions here. I think we've covered most of these. This one, you quickly displayed a tool that showed the backup repositories and their immutable time. How is that displayed? That was Veeam ONE. That was this tool right here. So, like I said, it is a different product. I just wanted to show it off a little bit because it does give you a lot of great insight, into your immutability and, how much storage you're using, and really just a nice global view of everything. So this one, how can I create an immutable backup job in Veeam, or does it only apply to the storage of the backup? So this one, you will need an immutable repository. This is a great question, by the way, because obviously we're talking about immutable backups, keeping everything safe. How do we do it? How do we make sure, everything is immutable? So let me go back in here just to my backup repositories. I have, specific names on these, so I know what is immutable. So, my Azure storage is immutable, my Linux hardened repository is immutable. These are all immutable storage repositories. So what that means is there's nothing different that you really have to do in the job itself other than make sure it's backing up or copied to that repository. Since it is an immutable repository, anything saved in that repository will be immutable. So once you have those repositories set up, or like a scale out backup repository, just direct your jobs to those places, and you can make sure everything's safe. Yep, and I saw that, or I guess not a question, but use immutable within the file naming convention. Naming conventions, it's great to keep them organized and very clear. Save you a headache later on. And it looks like, I apologize, I may be missing one or two because there are quite a few questions in here. But it looks like we've covered everything. And I'd just like to say, thanks for joining our webinar today. And that's a good spot to conclude.